In 1400, Venice was the most powerful city on earth. Not the largest, not the most militarily dominant, the most powerful. Because Venice controlled something more valuable than armies. Venice controlled the flow of trade between East and West. Every spice that reached Europe from Asia passed through Venice. Every silk, every dye, every luxury good that the wealthy of France, England, Germany, and Spain desired came through Venetian merchants, on Venetian ships, through Venetian banks. Venice took a cut of everything. And that cut made it the wealthiest city in the history of the medieval world. For 500 years, Venice was untouchable. It built a financial system so sophisticated that it wouldn't be matched anywhere in the world for centuries. It invented government bonds, marine insurance, double-entry bookkeeping. It created the first regulated currency exchange. It built a naval arsenal, the Arsenal, that could produce a fully equipped warship in a single day. A single day. No government in the world could match that industrial capacity. Then Venice made one mistake. One decision that seems reasonable in isolation and catastrophic in retrospect. A decision that every powerful empire, every dominant economy, every financial superpower has made at the peak of its power. And once you understand that mistake, you will see it being made again right now, in the most powerful economy on earth. Stay with me. Let me show you what Venice actually built. Because the scale of Venetian achievement is so extraordinary that understanding what was lost requires first understanding what existed. Venice sat on a lagoon in northeastern Italy, 118 small islands connected by canals and bridges, no farmland, no natural resources, no timber, no iron, no agricultural base of any kind. A city built on water, surrounded by water, with nothing to sell but the skills of its people and the location of its geography. By all logic, it should have been a minor fishing settlement. Instead, it became the center of the world. The secret was the trade route. Constantinople, the capital of the Byzantine Empire, was the gateway between Europe and Asia. The Silk Road terminated there. Spices, silks, precious stones, perfumes, everything the growing wealthy classes of medieval Europe wanted came through Constantinople. Venice secured preferential trading rights with Byzantium in 992 AD, lower tariffs than any competitor, guaranteed access to Byzantine markets. In exchange for those rights, Venice provided naval support to the Byzantine Empire. It was the first great example of financial leverage applied to geopolitics. Venice didn't conquer trade routes, it negotiated access to them. Once inside Constantinople's markets, Venetian merchants built the most sophisticated commercial network of the medieval world. They established trading colonies across the eastern Mediterranean, in Crete, in Cyprus, in Syria, in Alexandria. Each colony had Venetian merchants, Venetian warehouses, Venetian legal systems. A Venetian merchant could travel from Venice to Alexandria without ever leaving the protection of Venetian institutions. The financial innovations that supported this network were extraordinary. The commenda, a contract that allowed a wealthy investor to fund a trading voyage without participating in it, taking a share of profits in return, was essentially the first venture capital agreement. It allowed capital to flow to merchants who lacked their own funds, expanding the scale of Venetian trade dramatically. Marine insurance, developed in Venice in the 14th century, allowed merchants to transfer the risk of losing ships and cargo to underwriters, making larger and more distant voyages financially viable. Government bonds, the prestiti, allowed Venice to borrow from its citizens to finance wars, paying interest and creating the world's first secondary bond market where citizens could sell their bonds to others. This financial infrastructure was centuries ahead of its time. It made Venice not just a trading power, but a financial power, able to mobilize capital at a scale and speed that no competitor could match. And it generated wealth so extraordinary that by 1400, Venice's per capita income was the highest in the world. Venetian nobles lived in palaces. Venetian churches were filled with gold. Venetian art, Bellini, Titian, Tintoretto, reflected a civilization at the absolute peak of its confidence and prosperity. And then, in 1453, the world changed. The Ottoman Empire, under Sultan Mehmed II, conquered Constantinople. The Byzantine Empire, Venice's trading partner of 500 years, ceased to exist. The eastern Mediterranean trade routes that Venice had built its empire upon were now controlled by an Ottoman Empire that had every incentive to disrupt Venetian commerce and extract its own tolls from the trade flows Venice depended on. This was an external shock, not Venice's fault, not a mistake, just the brutal reality of a geopolitical transformation that Venice could not control. Empires end, trade routes shift. The question that defined Venice's fate was not whether Constantinople fell, but how Venice responded to the fall. And this is where the mistake was made. Venice had two options, the same two options that every dominant power faces when its structural advantage is threatened. Option 1, adapt. Find new routes, new markets, new sources of competitive advantage. The world was changing. Portuguese explorers were probing the African coastline, looking for a sea route to Asia that would bypass the Ottoman-controlled land routes entirely. Venice could have invested massively in oceanic exploration. It had the ships, the capital, the navigational knowledge, the merchant networks. It could have pivoted from Mediterranean trade to Atlantic trade, from the old routes to the new ones. Venice could have funded what Portugal and Spain were funding. It chose not to. Option 2, defend the old model. Fight to maintain access to the eastern Mediterranean routes. Use Venice's enormous accumulated wealth to fund wars against the Ottomans. Try to preserve the system that had generated 500 years of prosperity rather than building a new one. This is what Venice chose. The decision seemed rational at the time. Venice's entire economy, its entire social structure, its entire financial system was built around eastern Mediterranean trade. Its merchants knew those routes. Its warehouses were positioned for that trade. Its banks had lent against those trade flows. Abandoning the eastern Mediterranean meant writing off centuries of investment and expertise. Surely it was better to fight for what you had than to start over with something uncertain. This is the mistake, not the specific decision to fight rather than explore. The mistake was the underlying logic, that protecting existing advantage was more rational than building new advantage, that the system that had worked for 500 years could be preserved through sufficient effort and investment, that the structural change happening around Venice could be reversed rather than adapted to. In 1488, Bartolomeo Diaz rounded the Cape of Good Hope, opening the sea route from Europe to Asia around Africa. In 1498, Vasco da Gama completed the first voyage from Europe to India by sea. Suddenly, there was a route to Asian spices and silks that bypassed the Ottoman-controlled eastern Mediterranean entirely. Ships could sail from Lisbon to Calicut without touching any territory Venice controlled or any route Venice could tax. The economics were devastating. The sea route around Africa was longer in distance but far cheaper in cost. No Ottoman tolls, no overland transport, no multiple middlemen extracting margins at each stage. Portuguese spice prices in Lisbon were dramatically lower than Venetian spice prices. European merchants who had bought from Venice for centuries had no reason to continue when cheaper alternatives existed. Venice tried to adapt. It lobbied the Ottoman Sultan to cut tariffs, making eastern Mediterranean trade competitive again. It explored building a canal through Egypt to create a faster sea route through its territory. It invested in its navy. None of it was sufficient. The fundamental problem was not tariffs or canal routes. The fundamental problem was that the world's trade had shifted to a new axis, the Atlantic, and Venice was on the wrong ocean. Between 1500 and 1600, Venice's share of European trade collapsed. Lisbon became the new spice capital. Antwerp became the new financial center. The wealth that had flowed through Venice for 500 years now flowed through other cities, on other routes, through other institutions. Venice remained wealthy. It had accumulated so much capital over 5 centuries that it took generations to dissipate. But it was no longer at the center. It was a magnificent, wealthy backwater, a city living off its accumulated past rather than generating its future. Now here is the pattern that connects Venice to every subsequent financial superpower, and ultimately to today. The Ottoman conquest of Constantinople was Venice's external shock, the moment when the structural advantage that had generated 5 centuries of prosperity was disrupted by forces outside Venice's control. Every dominant economy eventually faces its equivalent. Britain faced it when American industrial capacity surpassed its own, the moment when the advantages that built the empire, the technology, the trade routes, the financial systems, are no longer uniquely yours. The mistake Venice made was not unique to Venice. It is the default response of every dominant power facing structural disruption. Protect what you have rather than build what's next. Invest in preserving the old system rather than creating the new one. Use accumulated wealth to defend existing advantage rather than to generate new advantage. Britain made this mistake after WWI. Its enormous accumulated wealth went into defending imperial trade routes and the pound sterling rather than investing in the new industries. Automobiles, chemicals, electronics, that would define the 20th century economy. America dominated those industries instead. America is making this mistake now. Its response to Chinese manufacturing competition has been primarily defensive. Tariffs to protect existing industries rather than investment to build new ones. Its financial system has become focused on preserving asset values, keeping stock markets high, keeping property prices elevated, keeping the existing financial architecture intact, rather than deploying capital into the productive investments that would generate new competitive advantage. The $8 trillion spent on wars in Afghanistan and Iraq was Venice's money spent fighting Ottomans. Enormous resources deployed to defend an existing position rather than to build a new one. The financialization of the American economy, the shift from making things to moving money, is Venice's pivot from trade to living off accumulated financial wealth. Profitable in the short term, structurally weakening over time. In the Atlantic moment, the equivalent of Vasco da Gama's voyage that made Venice's trade routes irrelevant is already visible. artificial intelligence, clean energy, advanced manufacturing, biotechnology. The industries that will define the next century's economy are being built now. The country that builds them will be the next Venice at its peak. The country that defends its existing industries instead of building the new ones will be Venice after 1500. Wealthy for a generation, irrelevant within a century. Venice today is one of the most beautiful cities in the world. Millions of tourists visit every year to marvel at its palaces, its churches, its extraordinary art. The wealth accumulated over 500 years of commercial dominance is still visible in every canal and every facade. But Venice, the commercial power, Venice, the financial center, Venice, the city that controlled the economic destiny of the Western world, that Venice ended the moment it chose to defend the past rather than build the future. The physical city survived. The economic empire did not. And that is perhaps the most important lesson Venice offers. Accumulated wealth is durable. Accumulated advantage is not. The palaces remain long after the trade routes shift. But the power, the real power, the ability to shape events, to set terms, to determine outcomes, that goes with the trade routes. America has more accumulated wealth than any civilization in history. More gold, more capital, more financial infrastructure, more technological capacity. The palaces are magnificent. The question is whether the trade routes are shifting. Whether the new routes, the new technologies, the new industries, the new economic axes are being built by America or by someone else. Whether America is Lisbon in 1490, funding the voyages that will define the next century, or Venice in 1490, funding wars to protect routes that are already becoming obsolete. Venice had 500 years of warning that dominance was not permanent. It spent its final decades of power defending what it had instead of building what came next. And the most powerful city on earth became a museum. If this changed how you see America's economic choices right now, subscribe. Because I'm tracking the exact historical patterns that determine which economies build the future and which ones become museums of their own past. Hit that like button if Venice just reframed how you see the decisions being made today. And drop a comment. Do you think America is Lisbon or Venice right now? Is it building the new routes or defending the old ones? Because history is very clear on what happens to the cities that choose defense over adaptation. They end up beautiful, irrelevant, and full of tourists.